Real estate stays exactly where you leave it. Personal property, on the other hand, is volatile. A vehicle, a painting, or a high-end camera can disappear across state lines or be sold on the black market in a matter of hours. Because movables are so easy to hide or destroy, the law provides a specific, highly regulated provisional remedy called Replevin. It is used for one strict purpose: the rapid recovery of personal property before a trial even concludes. Civil trials often take years to resolve. If a plaintiff has to wait for a final judicial decree to secure a stolen or wrongfully detained object, the property will almost certainly be gone by the time the gavel falls. Replevin solves this by authorizing a pre-trial seizure. This timeline charts the procedural flow of Rule 60. Taking property away from someone before they have had their day in court is inherently dangerous, so the rules enforce a master chronological sequence to prevent abuse. To trace how this works in practice, we will track a single case study: a plaintiff filing a lawsuit to recover a wrongfully detained Nikon Z9 camera carrying an actual market value of exactly 250,000 pesos. Rule 60 manages the volatility of physical assets by replacing them with financial guarantees. By demanding sworn affidavits and massive financial bonds, the court balances a plaintiff's right to secure their property against the risk of executing a premature, unjustified seizure. This timeline highlights the restricted window for a plaintiff to file a Replevin application. The moment you file your complaint, a ticking clock begins. The mnemonic is CBA, commencement or before answer. The application must be filed before the opposing party formally responds. Once the defendant files their answer in court, the procedural window closes. The right to apply for a writ of Replevin is permanently barred for the remainder of the trial. Within that open window, the plaintiff cannot simply ask the judge for the item back. They must submit a sworn affidavit that explicitly satisfies 4 mandatory elements. This checklist breaks down the OWNV requirements. First, the applicant must swear under oath that they are the legal owner of the property, or are otherwise legally entitled to its possession. Second, they must state that the item is being wrongfully detained by the adverse party, outlining the specific cause of the detention. Third, the property cannot be in custodia legis. You cannot use Replevin to retrieve an item that has been lawfully seized by the government to pay a tax assessment, a fine, or held under a legal writ of execution. Finally, the applicant must swear to the actual market value of the specific item. This is not an estimate or sentimental value. It is a hard financial figure. Swearing to these facts triggers the final and most punishing requirement of the application: the applicant's bond. This equation shows the strict mathematics of the rule. If the camera's sworn value is $250,000, the plaintiff must post a bond equal to exactly double that amount, $500,000. This double value multiplier intentionally creates overwhelming financial risk for the plaintiff. It serves as a guaranteed reserve fund to protect the defendant in case the court later determines the pretrial seizure was completely unfounded. If the applicant properly files the affidavit with the 4 elements and posts the double value bond, the judge's role becomes ministerial. They must issue the order and the corresponding writ of Replevin. The writ is a direct, executable command. It physically directs the court sheriff to locate the specifically described property, the Nikon Z9, and take it. By meeting precise numerical and sworn thresholds, a private civil claim is mechanically transformed into a state-enforced physical seizure. The court sheriff acts as the authorized physical muscle, tasked with executing the writ according to a strict 4-step mandate. First, the sheriff must serve the adverse party with copies of the order, application, affidavit, and bond. Second, the sheriff must take physical possession of the property. If the property is locked away and the defendant refuses to hand it over, the sheriff has the authority to forcibly break down doors. Once the property is successfully removed, the final step requires the sheriff to keep the item in a secure place. This timeline illustrates a critical pause. The sheriff does not immediately hand the property over to the plaintiff. The camera enters a 5-day limbo under the sheriff's custody. If the defendant does nothing for those 5 days, the property yields to the applicant. However, within that 5-day window, the defendant can launch a counterattack to retain physical possession. They can file a redelivery bond. To execute this, the defendant must first waive their right to formally object to the sufficiency of the applicant's original bond. Following that waiver, the defendant must file their own financial guarantee with the court. Like the applicant's bond, this counterbond must also equal exactly double the value of the property. The math is uncompromising. By posting their own $500,000 bond, the defendant forces the sheriff to release the camera back into their custody while the lawsuit proceeds. The 5-day window acts as a financial pressure cooker. The defendant is forced to immediately match the massive financial risk or forfeit physical possession entirely before the trial even begins. A serious procedural anomaly arises when the sheriff seizes the property, only to discover it belongs to a complete stranger. This triggers terceria, the protocol for third-party claims. To intervene, the third party must file an affidavit of title, explicitly stating their right to possession and the grounds for their ownership, and serve it directly on the sheriff. Upon receiving this sworn claim, the sheriff must legally drop the property. The applicant has exactly one countermeasure to force the sheriff to hold the line. They must post a new indemnity bond to protect the third party against damages. This chart compares a critical numerical distinction. While the initial applicant and redelivery bonds are set at double the item's value, an indemnity bond requires a sum equal to the actual market value. The law places a strict liability limit on this bond. The third-party claimant has exactly 120 days from the filing of the indemnity bond to sue for damages. Once that clock runs out, the bond is protected. There is one sovereign exception to this rule. If the writ of Replevin is issued in favor of the Republic of the Philippines, the government is exempt from posting an indemnity bond altogether. Terceria establishes a parallel financial safety net. By scaling the bond to actual value and imposing a tight statute of limitations, it prevents the legal system from holding a stranger's property hostage without consequence. With the physical property secured by either the plaintiff, the defendant, or a bonded third party, the sheriff has 10 days to endorse the proceedings and submit an official return, notifying the court of exactly how the writ was executed. We now fast forward past the arguments and evidence of the intermediate trial, arriving at the final node of the procedure: final judgment. A Replevin case does not end with a standard declaration of who won or lost. It concludes with a highly specific mandate known as an alternative judgment. The court's order is explicitly binary. It mandates the specific physical return of the item, or, if delivery cannot be made, the payment of its established cash value. This alternative phrasing is a direct response to the volatility of movable assets. If the physical camera was destroyed, lost, or depreciated into uselessness during the years the trial took place, the winning party is still guaranteed the exact financial equivalent. In addition to the return of the property or its value, the final judgment includes awards for any specific damages proven by either party during the trial, along with court costs. This brings us to Section 10, which governs how a wronged party actually collects those damages against the massive surety bonds posted months or years earlier. The rules set a strict procedural trap here. You cannot take your final judgment and file a brand new, separate lawsuit against the losing party's bonding company. This diagram tracks the required loop. Following Rule 57, an application for damages against the bond must be filed in the exact same trial court, with due notice, before the final judgment becomes executory. Rule 60 is a closed-loop system. It acknowledges that physical possession is volatile, substituting property with mathematical financial bonds early in the timeline to guarantee that no matter where the object ultimately ends up, the final judgment is sound, secure, and fully executable.